After talking about the four language skills in English and how much they intertwine with one another, we can safely talk about the receptive skills and productive skills separately. However, they will end up coming back together in the end. In this video, we will solely focus on receptive skills. Teaching, listening, and reading may seem significantly different, but they both should follow a relatively similar basic methodological model. So we are going to look at each stage of this model, and when you teach listening or reading, it is encouraged that you follow this model. In stage 1, it's about lead-in. So let's start by understanding the importance of engaging students with the topic before they read or listen. In this stage, we create a connection between their prior knowledge and the content that they are about to encounter, about to meet. We activate their schema by discussing the topic, showing a picture, or giving them some keywords or phrases from the text. Remember, how you lead your students in depends on the approach you use, bottom up or top down. If you use the top-down approach, your lead-in is about showing the bigger picture of the text. While using the bottom-up approach, you start by introducing keywords of the text, for example. So this stage helps set their expectations for the text and makes them more receptive, more engaging, right? More active when they start reading or listening. Stage number 2 is about teacher directing comprehension task. So once we've set the context, it's time to ask students to focus on the text in a general way first. For example, you could ask them to listen or read for the main idea or general understanding of what the text is about. This is a type 1 task, so the goal here is not to dive deep into details yet, but to get the overall picture. It allows students to engage with the content without getting overwhelmed by specifics of the content yet. In stage 3, this is where students read and listen for task. Now, we let the students read and listen to the text or listen to the text. We focus on answering general comprehension questions. They might look for main idea, main point of a passage, or listen for the overall message. So this helps them connect with the text on a surface level before they start picking out the finer details. And then we can move on to stage 4, which is about directing feedback. Right? So in stage 4, after the students have completed task 1 task, we gather feedback from them. It's important to let them discuss in pairs or small groups before we go over the answers as a whole class. This allows for peer learning and reduces the pressure of individual answers. You also want to focus on providing constructive feedback in a clarifying way, trying to clear out any misunderstandings with the answers you get from the students. So after they read or listen for task, they have to provide they have to, give us answers, right? That is where in this stage, you as the teacher have to make sure that you set a setting for them to actually give feedbacks in a way that you can clarify, but also with less pressure as well. And then you move on to stage 5, which is the last stage. This is where you direct text-related task. Finally, after completing the general comprehension task, we move into a more focused task. Okay, this is a more focused task, which we refer to a type 2 task. In this stage, the students look at the text again, the same text that we worked on at the beginning of this stage. We looked at the text again, but this time we focus on specifics now. Okay, this is where we ask students to focus on specific details or language points that we want them to focus on, our objectives of today's lesson, for example. You could ask students to analyze certain vocabulary, you ask them to analyze certain sentence structures or themes, and this gives them a deeper understanding of the text and it reinforces their learning. So to wrap this up, when teaching receptive skills, whether it's reading or listening, it's important to guide students through a process that allows them to gradually engage with the text. So by starting with the lead-in to activate their prior knowledge, followed by a type 1 task where they focus on general comprehension of the reading or listening, we make sure students aren't overwhelmed from the start. Then through the type 2 tasks, we give them a chance to dig deeper into the details of the text. Even though there is a basic methodological model for teaching listening and reading, we can't forget the issues that lie beneath the two skills. Here's the thing, besides knowing the right model of teaching listening or reading, we can't forget about the kind of listening or reading text we should give to students. And the reading texts or listening texts should be appropriate, suitable, and are at the right level of difficulty. So when we think about what makes a text difficult, two main factors come up: word and sentence length, and the number of unfamiliar words. Some researchers believe that longer sentences and words make a text harder to understand. Others argue that the real challenge is the percentage of unfamiliar words. If students don't recognize enough vocabulary, they'll struggle to understand the overall meaning of the reading or listening text. The issue is especially challenging in listening. If students don't understand a word while listening, it can break their flow. Unlike reading, where they can go back, they can't rewind in especially real-life conversations, right? If they can't catch up quickly, they may disengage from the task altogether. So as Krashen's theory suggests, comprehensible input is key for language acquisition. If the input is too difficult, students may become demotivated, and that's why we need to ensure the material we use is at the right level for students. This means that pre-teaching vocabulary, using extensive reading and listening, or sometimes choosing simpler alternatives to authentic language are three ways you can do when teaching listening or reading to ensure that your listening or reading materials don't affect your teaching and students' learning. So let us look at these three ways and see how they can help minimize the issues here that are presented to us. The pre-teaching vocabulary. So one way to help students is by pre-teaching key vocabulary from a reading or listening text. This removes some of the barriers for students to understand. However, if we want students to practice dealing with authentic texts where they encounter unfamiliar words, we shouldn't always give them the answers. Instead, we should only pre-teach words that will really hold them back. For other unknown words, we can encourage students to focus on the general meaning of the text first, and then they can, come back to individual words later. This is because something that we need to know as teachers, students do not need to understand every single word in order to understand the meaning of a reading text, right? If we pre-teach key vocabulary first, they can use those words to get the general meaning of the whole text or part of a text, right? And if they want to understand every single word, they can do so on a later date. The next method is the use of extensive reading and listening. So extensive reading and listening involve long, relaxed activities often done for pleasure, right? Which is different from what we call intensive reading and listening, where focus is more on a goal of getting better at a language skill, which is not fun, right? Okay. So in the extensive reading, students encounter materials at their level, okay, because they choose what they like to read or listen to, which increases their vocabulary and comprehension skills. The same applies to extensive listening or reading, whether through simplified material or podcast. Students improve by hearing comprehensible input. So this consistent exposure leads to better language acquisition and prepares them for more complex tasks if they have to do in class or are given by teachers, for example. So the use of extensive, reading and listening, or at least in the encouragement of students using extensive reading and listening, is quite important, right? And remember, when they do extensive reading and listening, they do so in a relaxed and more fun way, where they do not have to strictly focus on achieving a certain academic goal. Last but not least is the use of authentic tasks or authenticity. So authentic texts, such as natural language used by native speakers, are important for developing real-world comprehension. While authentic materials can be too difficult because, the way native speakers use the language is not the same as the one students learn in class or textbook, it's essential for students to learn how to understand the general meaning, even if they don't catch every word. The challenge with authentic material is ensuring that it's not too difficult for students, right? You need to ensure that your authentic materials aren't too difficult, but aren't too easy either. Okay, they have to be at the right level of students, of your own students, right? And it should be something that can be used to help your students grow in terms of comprehending, the reading or listening material. When we're teaching receptive skills, the key is choosing the right comprehension tasks. Sometimes tasks that feel like tests can actually get in the way of learning. Testing is useful, but it's not always the best way to improve students' learning and reading skills. Instead, we should choose tasks that help students understand the text better. So let us look at testing and teaching. The best tasks are those that help students engage with the text. They raise their expectations, they encourage them to explore meanings, and they help them understand the structure of the text. For example, activities like looking up information online or filling in forms from a listening task or solving reading puzzles are all great ways to improve their skills. Now, some tasks that might seem like a test, like true-false questions, but if we can use them creatively, they can still help students learn. For example, if students work in pairs to discuss whether a statement is true or false, which seems like a test type of exercise, it's not really about getting the right answer here, or just about getting the right answer, but it's also about understanding the text better through conversation. So if you put students in groups to discuss why the statement is true or false, they're not just, sitting down and identifying whether the statement is true or false. They actually communicate with another person or another group of people to discuss why it is true or false, or where they have found the answer, or where in the text, right, the students have found the answer. So if we ask students to predict answers before reading or listening, it helps them focus on the main points, which makes the task more engaging and useful. Another part of making or choosing the right comprehension tasks is to make sure that the tasks are with the appropriate challenge difficulty. One important thing to remember is that the challenge level of tasks that we want for students, we need to make sure that they are not too easy nor too hard. They should be challenging but still achievable. If the text is too difficult, we can still use it, but we need to make sure that the tasks fit students' level. For example, we might have beginners listen to a very, very difficult text like a Shakespearean conversation, for example, but we do not want them to do work on anything else besides identifying how many people are speaking in that audio, which is an easier type of task using a very difficult listening text. So even though the text is tough, the task is still something that they can manage, they can handle. On the other hand, if we give them a very difficult news broadcast that could, be too difficult for them, of course, and we ask them to like identify the main idea of the reading text or the listening text, it's not appropriate, right? It's not appropriate for them because it does not correlate with their level of difficulty